Welcome back to Brian's Run Pod. Before I introduce you to Tom Gaymor, I thought I would explain that I have split this interview into two parts. The first part talks about Tom's experience of sport when growing up and how he got into motorsport. In the second part of this interview, which will come out in a couple of weeks, we talk about his injury and the process he went through post-recovery. I just thought I'd also take this opportunity to say that I'm interviewing a friend of my wife's, Colleen McKenna. She's a very enthusiastic runner and has run regularly for most of her life. That interview I've also split into two parts. We talk about how from being a gymnast at school she transitioned into becoming a runner. Plus we talk about what kind of training techniques and tech she uses for her runs. I really hope you enjoy these interviews as much as I did. So you're thinking about running but not sure how to take the first step. My name's Brian Patterson and I'm here to help. And welcome to Brian's Run Pod. Welcome to Brian's Run Pod, and today we're going to be talking to an old friend of mine, Tom Gaymor, ex-racing driver, current motorsport commentator, and an ex-model. Having come late into motorsport compared to today's standards, he raced locally at Sandown Park and four-stroke karting, and then went on to race and live in France. Now you're going to be asking what this has to do with running. Well, I feel that it's always helpful to get a different perspective on how other professional sports people have dealt with career-defining injuries, and also maybe, their way of training. So, welcome to the podcast, Tom. Thanks for agreeing to speak to me tonight. Firstly, I just want to start off with, what were you like sports at school?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I love being active, and it wasn't until I got a bit older and realized that we all learn in different ways, but I'm a very sort of kinesthetic learner, very visual learner. And, that lent itself to sort of being out and about. So I was always looking out the window and longing for break time and PE and games. And then when the rain came, that frustration of having to play hangman and being forced into not leaving the classroom was my pet hate. So, I loved being active as a young kid. And, I'm 41 now, but even when I was younger, we had computers and, the Sega Mega Drives and the Super Nintendos of the day and the Commodore Amiga. Who's old enough to remember what a Commodore Amiga is? But, I didn't really have any games consoles. I was always outside and from a young age, I always had a bat in my hand, loved cricket, loved rugby. And then as I got a bit older, motorsports came into my life as well.
What's got you interested, just to segue into that, what got you into it? Because into motorsports? Because I know I was listening to a podcast with Scott Speed, and he said his dad was a massive F1 fan and loved Schumacher. And was there someone in your family who was really mad about motorsport or Formula One? Or?
Well, do you know what? The whole tie into sport, I was very fortunate. My granddad was a wonderful swimmer, and he loved open water swimming, and, tried to swim the channel, was always up at Lake Windermere, was always out, he was swimming in his 80s. Wow. And he was a doctor. He was the honorary RFU doctor, England rugby doctor as well. So I grew up around that professional sporting environment, and I used to get picked up from school and sometimes go to Twickenham and watch the England team train, Captain's Day and that kind of stuff. So I had that, and you're probably wondering what the link is, but he also had a very good connection, a chap called David Price, who we've just lost actually 14 weeks ago. David was a big name in the motorsport world. He ran Brabants for Bernie. He was instrumental when it came to success at Le Mans for various different manufacturers, and had his time at Benetton and did various other things in the sport. And I was invited along with my granddad to go and visit David at the sort of tender age of 10. And I never looked back, because, we all have, or the majority of us had the opportunity to play those grassroots or those sports at a grassroots level that I mentioned, football, cricket, rugby. But motorsport isn't something that many people come across. And I was very fortunate to have that experience. And from that day on, just the smell, the sight, the sound, it was so special that it was a dream of mine from that moment to try and progress.
Right. And then, as I said, in the intro, then did you kind of immediately start looking as to what was local, like you said, going to Sandown and then trying that out, or was there something that happened before then? Well,
I left the modelling behind, if that's what you're. We have to touch on that. I wasn't essentially a model. My mum was in that space and dragged me along on numerous different shoots. So,
right, okay.
I think I was exploited as a child, and
right, okay.
Didn't see too much. The funds that came her way, but yeah, so I left the modelling behind and then did go and find my local kart venue, and Sandown Park was that. And there was a wonderful chap there called Andrew Crichton, who actually runs all the on-track activity at Anglesey now, which is a rather unique circuit on the sort of north-west coast of Wales. And he had a wonderful way of introducing the sport to people like myself, to my family, to people that didn't know much about it. He created that trusted space, and we all went racing with a smile on our faces until you lost, of course, which was you have more bad days in motorsport than you have good days. I wish someone had told me that at the beginning rather than now. But we had that in-kart club, and everyone got together and raced every last Sunday of each month, and it was a wonderful time. And there were some really good young peddlers that came out of that, and that sort of progressed then to traveling around the south of England, and then a bit of national stuff as well as I got a bit older.
Right. And so I suppose it doesn't really come into it at that stage where you feel that keeping fit and karting are kind of they're two separate things, sort of thing, I suppose, at that stage. I mean, I suppose because you're quite young and
they are and they aren't. What you learn very quickly is it's very physical, and karting is very, very physical, and the machinery that you're in is very different to the arrive and drive equipment that you might experience as an adult. And the karts have a huge amount of grip. And you learn quickly that you're not strong enough to be able to do what you want to do. So the fitness comes in at a very early age, and a lot of that, to a certain extent, match fitness. But when you move up the classes, when you get the grip, the grip that I'm talking about it's enough to crack your ribs on the seat day. So when I say crack your ribs, think of a hard-boiled egg, and if you bang that with a spoon, it's gonna crack. That's what you're getting on your ribs on the seat stay. So you've got huge rib protectors that come in and protect ribs. Otherwise they'll just break. And when you're talking about 11, 12-year-old kids breaking their ribs, that's not even in a crash. So there's a huge amount of force on your neck through your forearms and again through the sort of middle part of your torso. So you have to start to really look at your fitness. And I hadn't done that before. I was fit, I was active, but it wasn't something that I obsessed about, or there wasn't a professional environment for me. It was what you did at school. You were just active. You did your sort of gymnastics, your PE, and your rugby and your cricket, and you had fun doing it. You weren't working with personal trainers and strengthening certain areas of your body and looking at your hydration and your nutrition. But that's very much what you start to do in the karting world, and it's not too dissimilar to being a jockey as well. Weight is a huge aspect. You cannot afford to be overweight, and what I mean by overweight is over the weight limit. They have a a minimum weight, and you don't want to be over that minimum weight because you're going to start losing time.
So kind of moving it on, what kind of forced you into, or what was that point where you think, right, I'm going to take the leap, and then I need to kind of either go somewhere that will teach me professionally, because as we said, you went to live and drive in France.
Yes.
What sort of prompted that?
Well, I was listening to a podcast the other day, actually, just before I talk about what prompted it, and it was a football player, and he was talking about when he became a professional, and a lot of people take that term and think, well, that's the first day he signed a professional contract, and he was alluding to the fact that actually he didn't have the maturity or the application on the day that he signed his professional contract to act and behave in his eyes in a professional way. So it wasn't until he got the right people around him and the right manager that he really doubled down and became what he sees now as a professional. And it was the same for me. It wasn't until I went to France, and the FFSA, which is the national governing body, they have a wonderful setup there. I lived in Le Mans. I was under the guidance of Henri Pescarolo, who is France's most successful driver when it comes to Le Mans. The Le Mans 24 hour is such a big event there. And, I had some wonderful people around me, and, Henri had a wonderful motorsport career in F1 and sports cars, and to be surrounded by those people, and to have teammates that were world karting champions and stuff like that. You go from very quickly living in a bubble in southwest London to, crikey, I'm living in Europe now. I'm away from home. I've got some of the best people in the world around me. I've got a real opportunity. And it was that sort of eureka moment where you just became a different person overnight because you had to, and you had to realize that even at the tender age of 17, that this was an opportunity that you couldn't waste, and you had to take control of every parameter that you had when it came to performance and maximize it. But going back to your question, I'm sure we'll touch on that in a minute, but going back to your question, how did France come about? I was lucky enough to be chosen through a national competition that takes sort of all the kart drivers in the country at that time, and you go through a shootout at Silverstone, and then the top 10, I think it is, out of the sort of 100 or so that enter, go to Le Mans, and then you do a 2-day shootout at Le Mans in Formula Renault cars, and then they take the top 2, and the top 2 get a fully funded drive in Europe, funded by Renault, funded by Elf, and you compete in European Formula Renault, French Formula Renault, do various different things, and live with foreign racing drivers. There's loads of drivers from all over the world that come and join you, and it was an amazing experience at the age of 17.
Right. Okay. And because I know, there's another school at Magny-Cours? That's where Damon Hill went, is that right?
Yeah, so Magny-Cours, and it's like anything in life. Yeah. Even what I did now at La Filière is sort of eroded away, and what Damon did at Magny-Cours, things evolve and change, and I'm going back 2 decades now. That it seems like yesterday, but I'm sure you're aware those 20 years just disappear in the blink of an eye. And there's other things that are up and running now, and the sports come on as well. We can't hide away from that the sort of the facilities. I went to a gold mine facility in La Filière, but there's other gold mine facilities now because the sport's grown, and so has it evolved, and there's pop-ups all over the place, and teams now that do a wonderful job. F1 junior programs, they've grown. So there's lots of opportunity for young drivers, whereas there wasn't so much in the way of opportunity when I was younger. You had to sort of find your own way.
I mean, what you hear a lot about these days is kind of, it's an expensive sport, but obviously you managed to find an avenue through your talent.
or lack of it.
Yeah. So,
but no, it's an expensive sport, and from an ethical perspective, it pains me. It pains a lot of people that are in the sport, because actually it's not as accessible as it should be. Yeah. And I was very fortunate to be brought up in an environment that meant that I could go karting and I could do things away from school, and not many kids have that opportunity to do those extracurricular activities that cost that amount of money. I was never going to be able to fund any more. And so, going to race in Europe and having that financial support from ELF was a blessing for me, because it kickstarted my career. And then with some success, you have the opportunity to build some momentum then, and build some investment and some partners, and try and get some sponsorship on board.
Yeah. So again, did they go through some form of fitness program with you? And what, if so, what was it that you were doing?
Well, the personal trainer there smoked about 40 gitans a day. He used to stand there in a white vest with a gitan in his mouth. And he had a wonderful way about him, but he worked on really, really hard. And you didn't want to let him down. You didn't want to let yourself down, but you had around you your teammates. And when you're in motorsport, it's a very solitary environment. And the one rule is you've got to beat your teammate. And so when you're training and racing with these people, there's that motivation every single time you're in the gym to be better than they are. And when whatever it is that you're doing, when you see pain on their faces, you feed off that. When you're dying inside, but you see they're dying inside, it gives you more, and it was a very competitive environment, but that
dog eat dog type.
Yeah, and that. But we were good friends as well. But we had that mutual respect for each other, and we knew that in those competitive spaces we were ruthless, and we wanted it, and everyone had the same mindset. But that created a sort of a mutual respect for each other. And there were times where you might crash into each other and not talk for a bit. and that might go on for a week or two, but but these things happen, and we were growing as young individuals as well, so learning our way, learning what worked for us, what was the best mindset. But we were super competitive, and we spent a huge amount of time training, because in motorsport you have a very high heart rate for a very, very long period of time. So if the event is 2 hours, 120 minutes, then you're going to be up at around 150, 160 beats per minute for that 2 hour period. So you need to be very fit in terms of being able to manage the stress that your heart's under, but also you're under a huge amount of G-force as well. So, there's a lot of stresses on the body, and the final one is heat. So if it's 30 degrees outside, then it's going to be about 40 degrees in the single seater. So I raced, like a little Formula One car, if you like, but the heat resonates around you in the car. You're sitting essentially on an engine, and so it's around 40 degrees, and then you're wearing Nomex underwear, you're wearing a triple layer Nomex suit, you've got a balaclava on, you've got a helmet on, there's no airflow, you're sitting in a hole, which is an aerodynamicist's nightmare, so they direct the airflow away from you. So you'll see drivers putting their hands up when they come into the pit lane just to get some air down their sleeves or whatever it is. But so you're in 40 degrees, which is not too far away from a scenarium. You've got a high heart rate of like 150, 160. And your core body temperature is pushing up to 40 as well. So, your core body temperature is right on the edge of what is humanly possible. People will go to hospital, to A&E, if they had that sort of reading. And so it's a really, really, really tough environment. And then, you've got to be hugely strong in certain areas to be able to turn the wheel, to to hold your head up in certain corners. You look at IndyCar, you know, I commentate on IndyCar at the moment. They've just been to Barber Motorsports Park in Alabama, which is a wonderful road course. But, you know, there's corners there where the load, when the car compresses, is actually unraveling the lock. They haven't got the physical strength to hold the lock on. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you're looking at about 35 kilos, which is a huge amount. If you think you know that's one hand really pushing that up. If it's a right hand corner, your left hand. So, you know, it's a lot of load, and people it's very hard to simulate what that load feels like and that environment feels like. So that's in a nutshell why you've got to be fit.
Because I remember, I mean, because I knew you when you were at David Lloyd down the road, but I remember you had this kind of neck brace thing. It looked, as I said in the notes, it did look a bit, but on the kinky side. But I mean, you know,
it was a bit
you can see,
wasn't it? Yeah. But I wasn't a member of any extracurricular clubs, I can assure you. But it's a big sort of leather strap. And it's got different straps, and it goes over your head, and it's attached to chains. So, just to put everyone's imagination at rest, that's what it is. But it got a few strange looks. But you know, you can hook that up to the A-frame and start working on the sternum-masculoid, the fastest growing muscle in the body, apparently. That side of your neck, but the sternum-masculoid you can work on. It's actually the back of your neck. So when you hit the brakes, it's 5G, so 5 times. You know, you've got a helmet on your head as well. So, you know, whatever your head weighs, however many kilos that is, I don't know, like a couple of kilos plus the helmet, whatever. So it's 5 times that. So, you know, it's anything up to like, you know, 40 kilos. Now, if I just dropped a 40 kilo dumbbell on the bottom of a chin strap, it would just rip your chin down to your chest. And that's very much the sensation every time you're braking. And, you know, when you first make a step up the classes, because as you go up from, you know, I don't know, Formula Renault to Formula 3 to Formula 2, whatever, there's more and more load. The cars carry more G-force. They carry more load. And so the sort of forces on your body grow. And when you first do the day in the car, you get to lunchtime, you're like, I can't keep my head up. You know, every time I hit the brakes, my chin's pressed to my chest, and it's just an absolute nightmare. It's a bit better with the hand system now, because you can cheat and do the tighten the tethers. But you know, and that's why you have that neck. Yeah, that's why you have that neck contraption, because it's the worst feeling not putting the work in. And I'm sure, you know, people listening to this or people running, when you go and race, you need to trust the process. You need to trust that you're prepared. You need to trust that you put the work in. And there's nothing worse than not doing that. It's like going and doing an exam and not doing the revision, that you're full of trepidation beforehand. And that's what it feels like in a race as well. If you're not fit or you're injured or whatever it is, there's loads of trepidation before the event, because you think, I'm not going to make this.
Yeah. So, so a lot of neck exercises, obviously quite a lot of core work.
Yeah, lots of core. Especially now I've got a metal back.
Yes. Yeah. We'll come on to that later. Yeah. And I know remember you're quite a good swimmer. Did you find that helped as well? And I mean, I know it's
so swimming,
form of kind of.
Swimming's good for me because it's low impact, and you know, naturally I go well in the pool. So I've been out in the open water today. I'm just coming back from a shoulder injury. I've got golfer's elbow caused by swimming, if that makes any sense. But so I've been out in the outdoor pool today. Not my outdoor pool, the Hampton outdoor pool. And I love swimming. And I think swimming's great because, you know, you can regulate your breathing. It's a bit like being in a single seater. So when you're in a high speed corner, you might have a long high speed corner into a high speed braking zone. That could be 3 seconds where you can't breathe. So swimming's quite good because it's anaerobic. Yeah. So you have the whole, you know, you can't breathe through the high speed corner, then into the braking zone, you can't breathe. And it's simulated in swimming.
So did you, I just want to sort of cut to the sort of the injury. Did you have the back problem Was this kind of like an inherited back issue, or it was?
But I didn't know about it. It was undiagnosed. Right. So I had something called a spondylolisthesis, which is really common. I think, don't quote me on this, but I think sort of 20% of the world's population have a spondylolisthesis. It's where the bone doesn't form properly in the lumbar spine, forms as the cartilage. And so you might not have complete what they call bony union there, sort of around L5, S1. Mm. And it leads to localized back pain and stiffness and irritation, that kind of thing, in and around the local area. Mm. And so I had that, but I you have that every time you're in the car. As I said, it's a brutal environment. So everything hurts when you're in the car. Yeah. So I wasn't, too symptomatic. And then obviously I crashed. And if you have all of those forces go through that area, it crumbled the cartilage away a little bit. So I didn't have that bony union. So essentially my back was not as secure as it needed to be in terms of, well, I could have sneezed and something went wrong, So it was straight into have the framework inserted around the vertebrae, and then bone grafts from my pelvis, so deep into my pelvis, bone grafts to build around the screws. And that's really painful if anyone's ever had a bone graft, especially from deep within the pelvis. Jason Lendon had one for his neck injury, the England rugby player, and he said it brought him to tears. So when he said that to me, I wasn't too enamored with what was to come, because if it brought him to tears, it was going to ruin me. But
he's a lovely guy. I remember I just talked to him.
Yeah, he used to come to David Lloyd. Yeah.
He used to come to David Lloyd. Yeah, That's it for another episode, and looking forward to speaking to you next week with some beginner hints and tips about running. I just want to let you know that you can follow me on X, or what was known as Twitter, at Brian's Run Pod. I have just recently set up a Facebook page which is called Brian's Run Pod, and I am on Instagram at Brian's Run Pod. Also, my website is www.briansrunpod.co.uk, where you can get show notes, or on whatever podcasting app you're listening to the show. Plus, all my episodes have chapter markers if you need to get to different segments of the show. Plus, leave a review, as it will help others find this podcast. Music is Happy Day by Stock Audio, not forgetting artwork by Alice Patterson. Till next week, thanks again for listening.